Thank you for joining us today for a conversation on redevelopment opportunities in the Capital District, North Nashville area. We're honored to have with us Council Lady Erica Gilmore, who's the District 19 Council Member for Davidson County. We have Steve Tuck, architect and owner at Tuck Hinton Architects. And we have Manuel Zeitlin, architect and owner at Manuel Zeitlin Architects. We want this to be a conversation among the three of you, and we will divide the conversation into two sections. First up, we're going to talk about neighborhood development in general in Nashville. And in the second section, we'll talk about redevelopment in Sulphur Dell and the North Nashville area. We want to get you talking to each other about these issues. So let me start with this. What makes a great neighborhood?
Well, I think as a council member, a great neighborhood, especially when we talk about the Capital District, is one that has lots of energy where you can see people. So we're talking about sidewalks, walkability, grocery stores, also talking about schools, churches, just everything that you would be able to do within your community without leaving. That brings a lot of vitality to a community.
So it's mixed use, has to be a lot of mixed use. And I think I've always heard the term that when developers see mothers with their baby carriages out on the sidewalk, it's ready to go. That neighborhood is now safe, comfortable. Yes. People are moving in. And I heard that particularly about 12 South area. People talk about
That's very important. When people see other people out in the community,
families living there, and
it's very important. Increases safety and the feeling that good things are happening in the neighborhood.
I think mass transit has something to do with that also, the ability to access transit easily and get wherever you need to go and not have to have a car.
Definitely. And being in, I guess, opportune places and not offbeat paths.
Yes, that's right.
And so much of like Nashville zoning history separated uses, thinking that was better for people to live in. You didn't want somebody living next to somebody working or next to a store, and and this whole idea now that all those uses need to be together so you can walk. I mean, that's one of the reasons we depend so much on cars, is that the city was designed in a way that you have to get in a car, or you have to travel a distance to get away from your house. So I think so. Great neighborhoods are that you can access those kind of things. But my kids grew up in Hillsborough Village, and their idea, instead of going to parties on weekends, they'd be a whole herd of them going down the hill to Hillsborough Village from our house on Linden, and there'd be a kid on a bike, a couple kids on bikes, a kid on a skateboard, some kids walking, and they look like Charlie Brown gang, just kind of this dust coming up around them. But that's what they do, like almost every Friday or Saturday night.
That was their shopping center for the suburban kids, where they go.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think that's a great point. And as we try to get people to use more transportation, we change our uses in terms of policy for a city. That's very important, because cars are very important to people in Nashville. And we say we want them to use public transportation, but we do have to incorporate the zoning, like you said, and then make transit stops accessible, like C pointed out. So those things are very important, because right now cars are still king. And if you're walking around in the city, a lot of times people will pull all the way over the crosswalk just because they're not used to it. You see bikers in the bike lanes, people veer over to the bike lane, so it's really scary. So we do have to continue to embrace and promote that.
And I think we're also seeing mixed uses. I think we all three totally are definitely drank the Kool-Aid. We all believe in it. But one thing we're seeing is a lot of apartments being developed around town. That especially like 8th Avenue and probably some of Jefferson Street, that just right near the ballpark, I guess, that aren't putting retail uses and restaurant uses on their first floors, or having Nashville maybe get to be known as the city of the fitness center, because all the apartments have fitness centers at the street level instead of stores and restaurants. So that the idea of a walkable city is feeling that you're safe, that there's a lot of activity going on.
A lot of eyes on the street.
And if we get block after block of apartments, again, 8th Avenue really comes to mind, that you're getting this whole string of apartments without any retail uses. So it may end up being pretty scary for people to walk, for block after block without that life and 24-hour life. I think a really important thing about neighborhoods is that walkable neighborhoods and urban neighborhoods is that there's a 24-hour cycle to them. They're not just people's work day, or after 8 o'clock it's dead. I think there are things happening all the time, and that's really key to a great city.
I think that's important. I think we have to stick with it too, because the mixed use is a part of it. But I know a lot of times, as I deal with developers, what they would tell the constituents in a particular neighborhood is that they cannot find persons to rent those spaces out. So we have to work on that. And how does that look? Is it boutique, or is it big retail spaces that of big companies that you would use. So a lot of times that ends up being done away with, even though it's a part of the code, and we say we want mixed-use zoning, we want retail at the bottom. A lot of times when you go through, you don't see that. So we have to encourage, and I think look for ways to encourage developers. This is the right thing to do, and I don't know, maybe if it's because it hasn't reached a certain threshold that the need for retail is not there.
And that's it. I think when you look downtown, the answer was we have to have mixed use. We have retail on all the first floors of the buildings, parking structure, and all that. And you can look at building after building. Encore is a good example. Well, they have a restaurant in there now, Edge, but until then, and even now, 3/4 of the block is still boarded up because they don't have it rented. I think the answer, though, is to understand that traffic will come and the density will come, and eventually that you're going to need that option. And so what you need to do is build the option in there. Maybe you have an apartment that you use for a community gathering room, or it's used for fitness room, or it has other options like that, but it's designed to be converted. It's designed so it can be a restaurant or a retail space when the density grows. And I think that's the key. Because you're right, retail just doesn't work in some places.
Well, the south side of the convention center you did is a great example of,
Yeah.
I know there was a lot of debate about having retail on that side, and I think it eventually maybe went away, or there's some office.
Well, we had
there,
retail consultants that came in and said, look, retail is going to grow from Broadway to the south, down 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Okay, that's just the way it's going to grow. Because it's flat, you're walking, you aren't going to necessarily go up the hill towards Commerce, you're going to grow to the south. And I think that's what we're seeing, particularly now that the Hall of Fame, the convention center, has got that magnet sort of pulling people from Broad in that direction. But we had a huge debate on the convention center about Korean Veterans Boulevard side, the south side, and what to do. And people were talking about, well, let's put liner buildings there. We could have done that, but the problem with liner buildings, building good neighborhoods, is you're building a false wall there waiting for someone else to come build condos or retail. Well, it could be there for 10 years or 15 years and kill the neighborhood. So through all the community conversation, what we decided to do is to pull a lot of the office around there, but the office space has 15-foot clear ceilings that you can get there, 2 levels. It's accessible through courtyards in the front, so it's designed that it could be retail. In fact, the Convention Center Authority and Charles Starks has said, look, when this space is retail and it start rents for $30 or $40 a square foot, we're out of here because we can be anywhere. And so I think that's an example of what we try to do in a very big scale. But I think when you're talking about apartments and smaller, applies to those neighborhoods. You just got to have adaptability. Same for parking structures. Don't make them 10 feet tall. Make the first levels a little bit taller, flat floors around the perimeter so you can go in there and insert retail in there. So I think that needs to be the answer to the developers. We understand your problem, but let's make it adaptable.
I like that, because you offered a solution.
Yeah.
That's a
And
long
that's from the
answer,
design. And that's great from the design point of view and the city planning point of view. And what can we do, Council Lady Gilmore, from the metro side to help kind of facilitate these kind of developments that we're talking about?
I think the answer, so I just think he offered up a great answer. What came to mind last night is when I had a community meeting dealing with Edge Hill, and that's what we looked at, something that's coming in the Music Row area. A lot of people have concerns about these large apartments coming in, and then the developer explained to them, we're going to ask for an SP, which is like a special, specific plan. Thank you. Sometimes I go brain dead. It's a specific plan. And I said, why can't you just build what you want to build now? He says, because at this point, the retail is kind of the conversation we just had. The community would not support the retail. And they said, well, let's look at 12th Avenue South. There's great examples of that. And how did that happen? But it has to be a critical mass of people to support it, and then what type of retail. So I think making it as an option, that's what we actually did last night. We said we're going to tie it in, won't do it right now, but we'll make it as an option so when more people come in that they can support retail and we can have the type of neighborhoods we want to have. And I think that's kind of where we are when we talk about everything, where we don't quite have a critical mass, but we know we need these things. As we talk about transportation, we know we need it, but enough people don't use it enough, or enough people are not stuck in traffic to see the importance of it. But I do think the city's doing a lot better, even with when we talk about parking garages, making people feel safe, how we do retail space at the bottom, requiring that there be glass at certain parts that you can see through, not being able to see parking structures from the street so that people feel safe, and making it close and not bending so much. Whereas I think one time they did used to bend. And I'm talking about the planning department. When people came in and they asked for exceptions, they said, oh, okay.
Part of our part of our issue, I think, is dealing with the notion of neighborhood. For example, New York City, very dense. There are neighborhoods there. They're very distinct neighborhoods, the grocery stores, walkability, all this happen in a very high dense area. I think that most Nashvilleians, I think a neighborhood, they think of single family homes, cul-de-sacs. That's their vision of neighborhood. And so we need to take that vision and pull it, not to New York, because it'll be a long time to get there, but pull it to a denser situation, because you're talking about, you start two things going on. You got someone who wants to build denser housing in Music Row, which they're afraid of, but they want retail. And you can't have both. You need to have both. You've got to have the density to make the retail and the mass transit work. And so I think that part of what we have to do in Nashville is make sure that people understand what does it take to get good quality density. There is bad density. We all know that. There are examples of that in Nashville of bad density. But good, high quality mixed use density is something, and there are good examples of that.
But I think that's
in
one,
Nashville.
but I think that's one of the things that's really an opportunity that's often lost that you're alluding
Missed.
to, that a lot of requests for increased density or for the more dense apartment projects are by people from typically out of town developers that are saying we can't have retail on the first floor, because it's not because the retail is not going to work, it's because they're building these buildings to flip them to a REIT, to sell them to real estate investment trusts, and they're saying that you can't, it's easier to do as an apartment, where the reality is you can also basically segregate from an ownership structure. You can segregate the retail floor out from the apartment floors. Owners can keep the retail floors, flip the apartments to a REIT, and be just as successful. So I think the council especially needs to, and you know, we were talking about there's going to be a huge turnover of new council people at this next election, and I was talking recently to Jane Alvis about how, in terms of education, or no, it was Christine Lalonde, about having education for new council people to understand that they've got this power, in a sense, that you can make trade-offs. You want higher density, you've got to put retail in. You want higher density, you know, maybe there needs to be an educational component. You know, whatever a neighborhood or specific community needs, the council people have that sort of opportunity to, request those trade-offs and not just say, okay, we're going to give you a higher density.
That's right.
Or
Did
not,
something for it.
And they won't figure it out to the third year of the first.
Yeah, exactly, right. Which is like bad,
Right.
term limits. We lose too many good council people. Another piece of that I was alluding to is that if you look at a local developer that has a long-time commitment to Nashville, like the projects in the Gulch, like projects by H.G. Hill, every single one of those projects has retail and restaurant components on the first floor. You look at all the apartment projects, I bet over 90 to 100% of them by out-of-town developers don't have retail at the first floor. So you're looking at, you can use 12 South as an example.
Rolling Mill Hill doesn't really have any.
So I think we're seeing a difference of people that have a long-term interest in the success of Nashville
Absolutely.
compared to people that have a long-term interest in making as much money out of the Nashville success and then leaving probably.
And that's a great, when we think about Rolling Hill Mill, though, I think what they're doing with the Entrepreneur Center and with the Pinewood Social, though, is phenomenal. I mean, so that's a piece of retail, and I haven't seen anything like a use of space.
But if you go another block up to the apartments they've done, most
definitely.
of those have very little.
Well, to your point, your case exactly, Rolling Hill, when it first came out, the RFP for that, there was about 6 or 7 architect teams that went after renovating the old hospitals and doing condos, this, that, and the other. And of those, every one of them were qualified to do the work. 5 or so, as I can recall, were local teams that had plenty of experience to do that, but they went with a firm out of Michigan, I believe, was the director or something like that. Went with them.
Right, yeah.
And of course, they blew in here out of Michigan, had 50 million apartments or whatever they had done. They blew in here. Of course, they went bankrupt and put MDHA in the city, I think, and some problems trying to deal with that. And they sat half-built, and their contractors are owed money, and all this happened. And I think the difference is when local people are involved that have the talent. And sometimes you've got to go outside to get the talent to come in for whatever reason. That is the case sometimes, but there are a lot of situations where developers architects, contractors, they have the experience. And if you go local, they care about the project so much more than people out of town do. They just do. And I think it's a good case to what you're making. That's a very specific situation that happened at Rolling Mill Hill that I think it's like if they're experienced, go local. Just do that only thing you do. Whether it's food or cars or you should support local.
And I'm thinking about our old site and where our office and gallery were in Hillsborough Village. It's been there 100 years. H.G. Hills tore it down. Is building a new building. People were upset. I mean, my daughter came and got me and said, "You need to see this blog post. Somebody's talking about how shame on that architect." And so I invited this young woman to come over and spend an hour with me and talk her through the drawings. And I said, "I can't imagine a more sensitive urban design." And she immediately went back and changed her mind and how this is a great project when she saw what the parts were. But the parts were it was the idea of committing to providing 120 parking spaces in the middle of Hillsborough Village. So there's a parking component that needs to be there. A great thing that the Planning Commission changed a few years ago was reducing the parking requirements and even eliminating them in the downtown code. So you have again some people that, especially again out-of-town developers that come in, or expedient developers that let's get as much in here as quickly as possible, not really worry about if it's going to work or not, and leave. Compared to the idea of that code is you've got to provide enough parking to make a project work, regardless for a zoning requirement, but for the uses in the building. But the other piece of it is that I said, look, what do you see right now looking down 21st Avenue, like we're the Belmont Church right there on the corner, looking into Hillsborough Village. I said, it's 9 o'clock at night on Thursday night. What do you see? She goes, nothing. I said, it's kind of dead, isn't it? She goes, yeah, it really is. I said, so just picture this. There's 2 stories of apartments above the retail. You're going to see people hanging out on the roof terraces. You're going to see lights on in the apartment. You're going to see activity.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, it's an alive corner instead of this dead corner. And that's what starts to make the city
you're
come
building
together,
density but keeping a good neighborhood.
Yeah.
All the Quad is a good neighborhood, which is what we're talking about, density in a good neighborhood, and then you've got the vibrancy that you need in all these special places.
Another thing I think is really interesting too that's happening is that Nashville's a different city today than it was even 6 months ago. I mean, I think all of our shared experiences as designers and councilperson has been that things in Nashville typically have happened one thing at a time, like 5 Points in East Nashville, the Gulch, Hillsborough Village, all these things have been kind of linear, whereas now it's happening everywhere.
That's true.
At the same time. And so a lot of the caution that we're talking about developers had, or a lot of the excuses they had why they couldn't do something, it's out the window, because you can just about put retail anywhere. You can just about, I mean, we're doing an oyster bar and high-end seafood restaurant at 3rd and Mildred Chute, which it's like on this, like kind of 4th Avenue across from the cemetery in this little industrial neighborhood that.
And speaking to that point, that's about all the time we have to talk about neighborhood development in Nashville, but I do want to throw out one final question on this topic. When you look at urban redevelopment in Nashville, knowing that this case study focuses on the Gulch and Rolling Mill Hill and the Capital District, what is the next big urban redevelopment area in your view? Just quickly as we finish out this section.
I think it's the Houston area. It's where Emmanuel is now. It's that area swinging all the way around back to 8th Avenue, because I think 12th Avenue, it's amazing when the city comes in and tweaks things just a little bit like they did on 12th, signage, lighting, on-street parking, sidewalks, things that start, that are trees, that are the things that are the infrastructure you need to start making a good neighborhood. And then the private economy just came in and just lined the streets with new and exciting things. And I think that area just took off overnight, it seemed to me. And I think that now as you look around where people are starting to upgrade housing, you start getting the tear downs, obviously, double houses on single lots, things like that. That's starting to happen now. 12th is sort of done. I mean, they're still doing a little bit of it, but it's people that want to sell and do that, it's sort of done. And now I think it's starting to swing across Interstate 65. The fairgrounds, I think, got a whole lot of attention a few years ago. With trying to do something there, and people all of a sudden, I think what really sort of happened, people said, wow, look at all this devalued real estate that's here between 2 interstates that's sort of no man's land. And I think it sort of gave the fairgrounds discussion, awakened that area, and people realize here's a whole nother neighborhood that's very close to downtown, that's got some cool amenities. And so my guess would be that's where it is. I mean, Germantown, East Nashville, you swing all the way around, they're all pretty much in their own way doing fine, and there's this one little pocket area that just hadn't taken
probably
off.
connecting Wedgwood, Houston, south all the way down to behind the convention center. That whole
Yeah.
district's.
But Sobro's hot to change, but I mean, it's hot. It's
Yeah.
not changing fast enough because it's hard, it's expensive, the property's
Right.
expensive, but I'm talking about neighborhoods that are more residential oriented. I think that will be one eventually, the Sobro area. But it's much harder than doing a project in the Houston area.
One comment I've heard a lot in the last few weeks is that Jefferson Street is done. You know, we've been talking for years, like, how do we get businesses to be viable? You know, you think about the Jubilee, and is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's
Jazz
called
Club.
the Jubilee at
Yeah.
one time. Yeah.
And, you know, and people have tried to do things that failed, whereas now, because of the ballpark, you know, things aren't necessarily under construction yet, but it's like, okay, that's gonna be really successful, it's gonna
I
be,
think it's
gonna
coming.
be really dense, and it's, you know, so in the question of what's next, it's like, that's how fast that changes. I mean, that's weeks.
Yeah,
you know.
definitely. I think anywhere around downtown, anywhere, there's still lots of land. Some areas have been more saturated than others, but a lot of people that come into the city and they ask for rezone, they say, wow, I'm still surprised that there's still so many parcels of land left. And if we were to like pull permits, I think anywhere around the city, and I'm talking about the core of the city, there's major development going on. So I think that's a good point that you made. Things are not happening linearly anymore. I'm having trouble saying that word, linearly. Yeah.
In a straight line.
In a straight line. Yeah, thank you. In a straight line anymore. It's just kind of happening all over. When I just think about Charlotte and the continuation of the Gulch and how all that development's coming in. We knew a little bit in 2007 because of the stock market crash. It was in land trust, and then the developments kind of just went down. But all that's popping back up within the next 3 years, even though the construction, we don't see it. We know it's coming up the pike. It's HCA. They're talking about movie theaters there. They're talking about more apartments. And, you know, I guess my question is, I just often wonder as a council member, I'm not quite sure where we are in our development stage as a city. Are we at the plateau? Are we at the apex? Are we moving on up? I mean, but there's development just all over. Everywhere.
Everybody wants to be in Nashville.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
amazing. I mean, we had a little debate the other day, you know, a couple weeks ago at breakfast about, you were saying we've got enough apartments, or, you know, are we getting close to the point where there's too many apartments?
Yes.
And my response was, you know, I think was no. It's like, I mean, I think we're in a snowball effect. And again, that's the thing, if you'd asked me that 6 months ago, I probably would have had a different answer.
It's in development, Manuel, you have highs and lows, and I guess what I was saying is I think there will be a plateau to the apartments in the next couple of years because they're building so many so quickly. And those last few that get in the game aren't going to do so well as the ones at the first part of the game. We'll still build apartments, but I think where it's going like this, it'll level off a little bit and then it'll continue to climb because I think we've got, I mean, take my kids. One of them lives downtown, loves living downtown. I don't know if she'll ever move out of downtown. I think younger people don't want the car, they don't want the yard. They've seen us all out there, you know, people with their six-pack in their pocket, riding, you know, cutting an acre of land in their front yard every Saturday. Well, that's not fun.
Right.
They got friends to see, things to do, golf to play. I mean, whatever. And so young people are all migrating closer to downtown. I think what's really interesting is these look-alike neighborhoods that are on the periphery. I mean, way out in the outlying counties, that are all the houses sort of look the same, and they're all a certain price range. I think
They're
those
in
are going to be
trouble.
gone. 10 years from now, 15 years, they're going to be a hard time selling those houses. And I think it's just because people are going to live closer to downtown, and if they want something out there, it's a big piece of property or a very special house, not a look-alike where the bedrooms were twisted here and there, and they made sort of a fake neighborhood, but really it's cul-de-sacs with the same house all around it, and you got to drive a mile to get anywhere.
Yeah.
Those places.
I think let's
good.
move forward too. I don't know if they're still doing the lending for apartments, so we might be at the end of it when we talk about developers and building up apartments. I think there'll have to be different size ones. I think at one time we started out at the beginning, and you like 2001, 2003, they were very large.
Right.
But now if we want more diverse persons coming into the city, they're gonna have to be smaller, medium, large, and not just one type. We're just doing one type
You know,
of
they got
square
these mini
footage.
apartments now.
I saw that the
they're
other day,
starting. You
yeah.
know, the design center had the students come in and do a whole design series on this. It's just fascinating. They selected properties, and they're like 300, 400 square foot units. And they're just amazing because things slide out and the bed folds down, all this stuff. And it's very usable, but they aren't home that much. They're out and
Right,
about, they're
yeah,
friends. This is just a place to sleep and have a bagel in the
And that's
morning, a
all
cup
they
of coffee,
need.
and they're gone.
Yeah, and I think
And
we're
so
looking
it's
at
so that's the
options.
environment they want. So I think we're going to start seeing those for sure. And I know there are some developers that are playing. It's a little edgy, but there's some playing around with the idea.
Yeah, I was working on,
Co-housing.
co-housing is under construction.
Yeah, in
What's that?
Germantown, co-housing.
Co-housing.
Oh.
So it's where people share a kitchen together. Each of them have their own room, and then they share a laundry room together, and then they all have one big space. So if relatives come in, they organize it amongst themselves, and their relatives can stay in that particular room. So when we're talking about apartments or rooms being certain square footages, they are done. And it's the first type in the southeast region in this area. They have a couple in California already.
Nashville, the census says Nashville will gain 1 million people in the next 20 years, 2035. 1 million people, size of Denver, right now.
Wow.
Okay? So you're right. There's going to be a lot of construction of all types going on. I think they'll come in ebbs and flows, and how that works from a developer standpoint. But I think that the one thing Nashville, and so a lot of people say, well, we're just a young Atlanta. Nashville's larger than Atlanta in 1930, 1940, I believe. It was the airport that took Atlanta off, really. But I think Nashville has done something very smart. There's a lot of conversation about planning, development, what we're talking about
Right.
here. It's happening all over the city, community meetings. Nashville has a very highly educated, if you go to these community meetings, they know what the issues are typically, and they're fairly intelligent level of the discussions. And I hope that Nashville, when they plan this growth, and I know like the AMP, we're talking about things like that, there's always resistance to those kinds of things. But I think that Nashville has very good conversation, and most people are supporting quality growth, and we don't end up getting ourselves into a position like Atlanta is, which is the transportation problems and the sprawl. Of course, Nashville's got a lot of sprawl, but we need to continue to densify the city. And so I think I said that only because I agree with you that we will continue to build a lot of things to house these 1 million people. What people don't understand when you're like fighting the AMP or mass transportation is that we don't have really any other options.
Right.
We don't have any other options for things like that.
And I think we'll have to incorporate more, we talked about affordable housing, but subsidizing housing too. As we move forward and we get grants from the federal government, how do you do that? And there's a couple test projects that we're looking at now. People are looking at Casey, which is in East Nashville. We're looking at what we did already in North Nashville with the Joe Johnston area. But there's still a lot of housing developments just because of the trends that happened over the last couple of years in Nashville. And so how do you deal with that particular population in placing them respectfully with dignity, having housing, but still having ways for them to get back and forth? Because if there's only good transportation in one area and you move them out, then you've disenfranchised them more. And maybe we're talking about the working poor. Some people have certain ideas, but we're just talking about people that are working poor that would need to get back and forth, that are making $8 or $9 an hour, that could be working downtown in that food industry, or they could be working at Vanderbilt or something like that. And as we begin to tear those houses down, and we build more, I think we're trying to build one for one now.
And the elderly
And
also.
the senior citizens. And we know that the millennials and the senior citizens will be in the city. We know that, looking at the general plan, but just how do we do that? How do we do it with dignity and make it where it's accessible?
It's a very difficult problem that a lot of cities grapple with. What happens is as you build density, land price, everything goes up. You want to build density for a lot of things to work and to have really good neighborhoods. And, if you go to Portland, for example, they drew a sort of a man-made line around the city and said you can't build outside the city. So it forced, gentrification and forced high land prices and high rental prices. We were with the chamber at Vancouver 2 weeks ago. Vancouver has one of the highest cost. This lady we're talking to, well, let me put it this way: 82% of the average Vancouver's income goes to housing. 82%.
That's too much.
And she lived in a 600 square foot apartment and paid $2,200 a month for 600 square feet. So that's an extreme. We sure don't want to get there. But as cities grow denser and you try to remove some of the sprawl to make the neighborhoods better, then typically the land costs start driving up, you start driving away. some of the policemen, the firemen, the teachers, the people like that you need to support the community. And then how do you remedy that? It's a tough question.
And we've talked about,
Because the federal government's not just coming up with money and money and money. That's probably getting less and less and less.
well, in regard to Wedgwood, Houston, our new neighborhood, we've talked about, there's a, pretty substantial working poor, housing stock. And as the neighborhood values go up, the taxes go up, which is really probably the big generator of gentrification, that people have to move because they can't afford their taxes. And there've got to be some ways you can freeze taxes for residents in existing neighborhoods to enable them to stay there. There seem like it seems like Nashville's got an opportunity to solve some gentrification drivers that are almost, they're not necessarily, they're not unsolvable. The one you mentioned, prices are going to go up, and you're sort of blocking maybe entry to a neighborhood, but finding ways where you can allow people that already live there to continue to stay there.
That's true.
Then that makes the neighborhoods richer, and it keeps it from becoming all the same.
Right, and it's more sustainable. And I think we have programs for senior citizens, but we just have to look at other programs. We have tax freeze programs, but it has to be something that where you not just really, sometimes in our society you have to be really poor to benefit from something really. So we need to kind of cover those that are poor on up into the working class.
Let's shift the conversation now to opportunities in North Nashville, specifically the Sulphur-Dell area and the new ballpark. Could you talk about the opportunities that you see in the Capital District from the perspective of local architects and a council lady who are involved in your neighborhoods? What opportunities do you see?
Well, I think there's lots of opportunity for retail. I think we discussed it. There's lots of residential that's been coming in for the last maybe 5 or 6 years in Germantown, and I think it is built to its capacity. When we think about this, maybe 1 or 2 parcels of land, and if it's not already developed, somebody's probably putting a permit on it right now to develop it. So there's more opportunities for retail. We only have 1 grocery store servicing that whole area between Germantown, Buena Vista. We talk about the Capital District. We have maybe 4 or 5 different neighborhoods around Hope Gardens, but there's 1 grocery store. So we need more grocery stores. There are some boutique restaurants at this time, but we need more restaurants for different demographics, and maybe something when you just want to hang out and you don't want something maybe like a $20 platter. So I see a need for that as well.
$20 platter of hot chicken.
Yeah.
Needs to be some choice.
Yeah, there has to be more variety there. But I think there's wonderful opportunities for that, and more social places. I see a lot of cafes coming in, which I think are really neat, but we still need more opportunities for evening places to hang out for young people.
Is there a public transportation component of the ballpark? Is something
It's supposed
happening
to be
around there?
a green line that's supposed to
Okay.
connect
Probably
them
go
with
there.
it.
That'll be just a free
I'm sure
circulator
it'll be,
bus?
and it may be special busing for games. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know that for sure, but I would imagine like the Titans, there may be some kind of paid busing that you
There's a
can park
green
somewhere.
line that's
and
gonna
get
stop
there.
in there, like with the farmer's market that goes through there now.
Right.
It's supposed to stop directly at Sulphur-Dell.
But I think it's hard to talk about North Nashville, obviously without talking about the state and what their plans are, and the Bicentennial Mall, they're continue to build that out. The Library and Archives building will be on Jefferson. There's a good chance the State Museum will be built there at some day, and I think both of those being in the mall itself being, I mean, it's the largest single attraction in Tennessee. I think they count every jogger that runs by there, but it is the largest attraction if you look at the list of attractions beyond the Country Music Hall of Fame or any of them. But I think having those there and having school kids from the state and everything, it becomes a real generator. And I think it goes back to, I think it was the state's commitment to that park that caused Germantown, the residential, to flourish in that area. And once the residential got a certain density, you started seeing the restaurants and so forth, and now you're seeing the ballpark. That'll bring more restaurants, and it's just sort of the way it works. And I think you're going to see that. What you're going to see is that a real anchor at that end of Jefferson, and I think that anchor at that end is going to start growing to the universities. It's going to be a natural. It's like a shopping center where you have the Sears at one end, the JCPenney's the other, and you've got the universities over here, and you've got now the anchor, which is the mall and Germantown and the park, and I think then everything in between just gets filled in sort of naturally by the private sector.
That kind of reminds me of something we were talking about a little while ago. We're doing 2 apartment projects on right by Meharry on DB Todd and Marina Street. And yeah, I guess we started planning them a year and a half or 2 years ago, and I was like begging them to create a space on the corner for a retail space that they could reserve, and decided not to do it. Let's get all apartments.
Yeah.
And if you did that today, of course, there'd be no question that you'd have retail there. Again, that's how fast things have changed.
And I think you see with what's going on with Marathon and the way that that's developed and really just taken off in the last 5 years. And then the new 20th Avenue connector, then I think it's just a matter that that circle sort of gets connected, you know, up Jefferson to the universities and then back down into the 28th, back down to Charlotte.
And yeah,
With
Marathon has
retail.
some really neat things going on, whether it's
What's that?
Marathon Village
yeah.
has some really,
Well, all of Charlotte. Charlotte's like, you know, okay, build this road, this axis, and now Charlotte's the hot street.
yeah,
You know, it really is sort of, it's the new hot street in a way.
that's construction.
What opportunities do you see the new baseball park bringing to the Sulphurdale neighborhoods in general?
It's almost confidence in it, you know, that
I think so. I think when the city invests, I think the city's done a good job in this. Most time you need the city to make an investment in areas where people know, like the structure of the area has always been good. It's close to the interstate. It's right from downtown. It's right in front of it's front of the Capitol. So it was a wonderful area. But I think that's when the city can facilitate what Manuel was saying, the confidence that, hey, it's okay to come over in this area. It's so okay that we're taking so many millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're investing in it, and we're going to have some private developers, and that drives other people to say, okay, well, if the city's investing in it, and this is taxpayers' money, then we can come over and do the same. And I think we see that happening with a lot of private development. There are some Sounds apartments that are coming up on 3rd and 4th. There's development that's coming at 4th and Taylor as a result of that. And then I saw the other day that there was some property that was purchased at the Stockyard. So that whole area just about now has been between Embry, the Sounds development, and just what's going on. It's been pretty much developed.
I think the difference, you compare the Titan Stadium with the Sulphurdale Stadium, the fact that you've got, how many games, 50, 60 baseball games?
72, I think, 72.
10, 72, 10 football games. You look at the stadium over here that is not surrounded by residential because it's split by the interstate and the river, so it's sort of isolated, surrounded by asphalt parking. And then you look at Sulphurdale, what's going to happen there because of the number of gains and because of the investment in that area, a big investment in the Titans. But I think because of its location in a residential area that's already healthy, and like you said, all the other, you know, close to the interstate, all these other things going on, it's just sort of ripe to make that all come together. You know, it's going to take a whole lot more to make the stadium work because they don't have enough games there. Anybody wants to invest in a restaurant or live near a surface parking lot or whatever. So you've got a big area there that we've got to deal with. Now, in some ways it's good because I think you're holding land that can be developed over time. Surface parking will be structured parking over time, and you'll start getting mixed-use development over there, but it's a little harder. It's a little easier around Sulphur. There's too many other areas that's a little easier to deal with.
And I think that because the project's not too big either. I think
Yeah,
I
it's
like
not too big. That's right.
The numbers that we went with.
Well, that's why it works in
18,000.
neighborhood. If you're taking the Titan Stadium and putting that same location, it'd be, whoa, what are you doing
Right,
here? You know?
it's not overbearing.
It's a scale thing, and you almost had to put the stadium there, but it just shows the way that the private sector reacts to one public investment as opposed to another public investment.
I think so.
So,
I was thinking if I had a slogan for the Jefferson Street neighborhood, it'd be "Move Back Home." You know,
I like
come
that.
back home. That so many kids moved out. You know, and you know, families wanted to stay there, and just because of the economics, you know, moved to Bellevue. You know, it's like come back in. You know, come back in and you know, keep it a racially diverse, economically diverse neighborhood. Don't. What my biggest fear would be, it just becomes another gentrified, homogeneous community that is for, what's the word, millennials, or, you know, it's
Yeah,
like,
millennials.
you know, it needs to be a very strong culturally based community that's doesn't get displaced, but actually here's a chance to come back and
Right.
really,
well, the neighborhood had such a rich musical
Yeah.
history too, to bring back some of the music and have some of the clubs that were there. It'd be really cool.
And I think too, some jobs. We need more jobs over there, so that people. I think there's a couple of technology places in Germantown, but we need more different type of jobs that are of the future. And I think it would be good to see the city do that as well. Like if we could find a nice little fit of something that could fit in North Nashville that was a job generator, that's once again would be another confidence builder and would encourage. And a lot of people use that sometimes as a stimulus. They put some type of city service or something like that to generate more.
Well, you're right. I mean, if I think about the Assurian company on Second and Peabody, and is it 600 employees they have in that building, and they're all making $90,000 a year, and they're sitting at a 4-foot wide desk with 2 monitors and keyboard, and and immediately I'm going, well, wait a second, where are these? And it's mostly guys. I mean, where are these guys going to eat? Where are they going to live? It's like. That we often think a lot of the conversation we've been talking about, restaurants and retail and apartments, when this whole idea of thinking about offices and jobs as a generator is probably something that's not thought enough about in terms of, you think about big office centers as suburban generators of jobs, but getting those jobs back in the city,
and you're basically segueing into my last question, which was just to kind of envision out loud what your perfect ideal future for Jefferson Street and North Nashville and the Capital District neighborhoods would be. Just kind of blue sky out there talking about these great job generators. Or
I think jobs, and when we talk about, there's so many neat jobs in the future now. It's not like they used to be. You can do any type almost from your home. A lot of people work in their house. But the perfect thing would be, to me, is more activity. I think, like I said, I think Germantown's almost there. We don't have to worry about that with Sufferdale and just all the things that's already. But when you cross Jefferson Street, and we're talking about crossing over Rosa Parks, entering into 10th, 11th, 12th, going up to Fisk, and considering that all those students are there, that there's a place that you can see more kids hanging out on Jefferson Street. And they really don't do that now. They head towards Charlotte, and it's because there's no businesses there. So more retail, and I kind of think of like U Street and DC, or like we talk about different places in New York, or there's a city downtown Denver where they're just hanging out, and it's retail on both sides, and it feels really, really safe, because it's not quite there yet, but it's not because it's not safe, it just doesn't feel safe because of the development hasn't come into full fruition yet. So I think that's it. You can go out and I can get some clothes without having to go to Green Hills. I can go get some nice, wonderful groceries without going to the turnip truck or having to go all the way out to Green Hills again to go to Whole Foods. I mean, you can just kind of get a lot of different things there, which I think is moving there, but we're not quite there yet. And there's a lot of different things
I'll
there.
bet you that the draw from the university in the Charlotte direction, I can see that because it's a much more active retail space. But I think with the hub of Germantown and what's going on now, I think that may start to pull that in this direction. And that's what I meant by this retail developing between the universities in Charlotte and universities in here. And so, I don't know, I think that there's a lot of good hope for what could happen on Jefferson Street. I think that, having universities anchoring that end of the neighborhood, I think, is really, really strong. And the river at the other end, it's got a lot of amenities that are there. They're just sort of right.
And a connection across to East Nashville right there.
And the connects to East Nashville. And so I think you've got a park there. You probably need some other parks in that area. Everybody needs to be able to walk to a park in a good neighborhood. So I think a lot of the ingredients are there. It's just, having the public-private initiatives to sort of continue that drive and doing some of the little things like 12th, just put a few street lights and new sidewalks and see if the private
Definitely more
development doesn't
restaurants
fall
though for
back.
the kids. The kids
Yeah.
need it, because I see a lot of them at Chipotle on West End or
Yeah.
Panera. Some of those things need there. We forget about sometimes that the university kids are over there. So I think that's
That's right.
really
That is.
important, because they have, they're spending $30,000 sometimes a year or a semester just for the school. So they have the dollar to spend. We just need to create that for them.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining me today and providing this excellent conversation. I really appreciate it.
All right.
It's fun.
You're welcome.
Thank you.